Everyday Americans count on EPA to protect them and their families. That is a responsibility we take very seriously, and it is a responsibility that demands action and leadership, especially when we discover emerging risks to public health. One of those risks is PFAS. Here in Region 3, we have first-hand experience with PFAS. We continue to work with states, local communities, and affected families to help address PFAS and protect the drinking water. When EPA held community engagement across the country to hear directly from impacted communities, here in Region 3, we chose Horsham, Pennsylvania. I appreciate the efforts of all the regional staff here at EPA Region 3. It is an honor to work with all of you daily. And that is why we are privileged to be joined today by EPA Acting Administrator Wheeler to unveil and explain the agency's groundbreaking PFAS action plan. This action plan is the result of unprecedented work and collaboration across the agency. At this very moment, EPA is rolling out press conferences just like this in every region, which is the first for this agency. From day one, Administrator Wheeler has made this a top priority to get this action plan done quickly and to get it done right. He is a problem solver and person who, quite frankly, I know I speak for all the regional administrators. He is one who listens and cares and wants to make sure we do that as well. We appreciate the fact that he is here today in Region 3. We have relayed to him all the concerns that the communities have here in Region 3, but to unveil this today here speaks to his dedication to the mission of this agency. So please join me in welcoming the Acting Administrator today here in Region 3. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Kaz, for the introduction. Certainly appreciate it. We are gathered here today to unveil EPA's PFAS action plan. Before I go any further, I want to thank all of the EPA staff and scientists involved in today's announcement, including many of the folks in this room who were a critical part of our community engagement event in Horsham and have helped address PFAS challenges throughout the region. I don't have time to mention each of them by name, but I do want to recognize a few. Rick Rogers, who leads the drinking water program in Region 3, has been a national and local resource for communities impacted by PFAS. His expertise and knowledge has been invaluable in bringing the issues to the agency. Roger Reinhardt, who has coordinated Region 3's enforcement response for several PFAS-contaminated sites, ensuring a safe, alternative supply of drinking water was provided to public water systems and private well owners. Sarah Kloss, Andrea Barbary, and Kathy Davies from Region 3's Superfund program, who have coordinated with the Department of Defense on assessing and addressing the extent of contamination on 3 Pennsylvania defense facilities. Connor O'Laughlin, who discovered PFAS contamination in a Delaware public water system. Cindy Caparel, Region 3's laboratory director, who co-led the effort to develop new laboratory test methods analyzing PFAS in the environment. And I'd also like to thank the teams of on-scene and community involvement coordinators and public affairs specialists who have worked hard to respond to the emergencies in the Mid-Atlantic region. Finally, I'd like to recognize the significant work of the state agencies who took the lead in responding to several significant PFAS contamination incidents within their jurisdictions. Thank you all. Today's announcement is a historic moment for the agency and the American public. It took groundbreaking efforts to develop this plan. This is the first time we have utilized all of our program offices to deal with an emerging chemical of concern. It is the first time we have put together a multimedia, multi-program national research and risk communication plan to address a challenge like PFAS. It is also the first time that we have held press conferences in all 10 of our regions simultaneously on the same topic. And we're doing that because of the importance of this issue in so many communities around the entire country. On top of that, this action plan is the result of unprecedented outreach to the states and affected communities. In May of 2018, EPA convened its first ever National Leadership Summit to gather information and best practices from over 40 states, tribes, and territories. Following the summit, we hosted a series of listening sessions in areas directly impacted by PFAS, including Horsham. We also visited New Hampshire, Colorado, North Carolina, Kansas, Michigan, and Washington State. We also opened up a public docket, and we received roughly 120,000 comments from people across the country that helped go into the development of this action plan. All of this feedback and input is a critical component of the final product that you see today. I want to just point this out for everybody and people watching at home. The action plan commits EPA to take important steps that will improve how we research, monitor, detect, and address PFAS. I'm going to highlight 5 of the most important actions in the plan. First, we are taking concrete steps to protect our nation's drinking water. Contrary to misinformation in the press in recent weeks, EPA is moving forward with the maximum containment level, or MCL, process outlined in the Safe Drinking Water for PFOA and PFAS, 2 of the most well-known and prevalent PFAS chemicals. By the end of the year, EPA will propose a regulatory determination, which is the next step legally required under the Safe Drinking Water Act for establishing the MCL. We are also gathering and evaluating information to determine if regulation under the Safe Drinking Water Act is appropriate for other chemicals in the PFAS family. Second, EPA will continue our enforcement actions. I want to stress continue our enforcement actions, and will clarify our cleanup strategies. To date, EPA has issued direct enforcement orders or assisted state enforcement actions in 8 separate instances, and we have provided states and local governments technical assistance at dozens of other sites around the country. This work will continue. We're also coordinating with the Department of Defense and the affected communities at a former Army facility regarding a DoD action to protect the community's drinking water for PFAS releases. In addition, EPA has already begun the regulatory development process for listing PFOA and PFAS as hazardous substances under the Superfund statute. This important work will provide additional tools to help states and communities address existing contamination and recover costs from responsible parties. Very soon, EPA will release interim groundwater cleanup recommendations for sites contaminated with PFOA and PFAS. Groundwater is the source of drinking water for many communities and vital for our nation's agriculture sector. These recommendations will give states a much-needed framework to facilitate timely cleanup efforts that are protective of groundwater. Third, we will expand our focus on monitoring and understanding PFAS in the environment. Specifically, the agency will propose to include PFAS in the next round of nationwide drinking water monitoring under the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Program. In the previous round of monitoring, the agency found that 1.3% of public water systems had at least one sample with PFOA and PFAS concentrations greater than 70 parts per trillion, which is the agency's health advisory level for PFOA and PFAS. The agency will also consider PFAS chemicals for the toxics release inventory. These actions are especially important because they will provide us with even more data on where PFAS are found in the environment. Fourth, EPA is expanding our research efforts and the scientific foundation for addressing PFAS by developing new analytical methods and tools. We are focusing our research on 4 key areas. 1, what are the human health and ecological effects of PFAS exposure? 2, what are the significant sources, fate and transport pathways and exposures to humans and ecosystems? 3, what are the costs and effectiveness of different methods for removing and remediating PFAS? And 4, how does EPA support stakeholders in using science to protect public health and the environment? Our goal is to close the gap on the science as quickly as possible, especially as it relates to other emerging risks like Gen X. We're also working to develop new technologies and treatment options to remove PFAS from drinking water. Finally, we will be working across the agency and the federal government to develop a PFAS risk communication toolbox that includes materials that states, tribes, and local partners can use to effectively communicate with the public. We owe it to the American public to be able to explain in very simple and easy to understand terms what are the risks that they face in their daily lives. Americans count on EPA every time they turn on their faucet. That's why communities across the nation have asked us to provide a comprehensive approach to understanding PFAS and protecting drinking water. Our action plan provides just that. Through these actions that I mentioned, we are stepping up to provide the leadership the public needs and deserves. It is important to note that while we worked on this action plan, we didn't stop working on the issue. In fact, we moved forward this past fall on toxicity standards for 2 of the chemicals, and we are already beginning to implement the rest. We will keep the public informed of our progress, and we will continue to engage with the states and local communities. This action plan represents a pivotal moment in the history of the agency and a pivotal moment for public health and environmental protection. This is the most comprehensive cross-agency action plan for a chemical of concern ever undertaken by the agency. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take a few questions about the action plan.
We have microphones, and if you would please identify your name and outlet.
Do we have a question right here in the front? Oh, over there in the front.
Yeah, I'd like to know if you could, I'm sorry, Leslie Pappas with Bloomberg Law, Bloomberg Environment. I'd like to know if you could be a little bit more specific on exactly when the EPA is actually going to set limits. You're saying that there's going to be a regulatory determination in 2019, but what does that mean, and how many months or years after that will you actually set the limits?
Sure, that is the first step in setting an MCL under the Safe Drinking Water Act. To be honest, the agency has not set a new MCL since the act was passed in 1996. So we're charting a little new territory. I can't give you a definite answer as far as how long it will take, but we have to go through the regulatory process as outlined in the Safe Drinking Water Act, and we're moving as quickly as we can. Is there a question in the front row here?
Kyle Bagenstos from the Bucks County Courier-Times newspaper. Is it possible when the determination is made by the end of the year that the EPA will elect not to set an MCL?
We're going through the regulatory process. We can't predetermine what the outcome will be because we take notice and comment, but I have every intention of setting an MCL. The important thing to remember, though, even while we're working on this process, we are still enforcing the current health advisory. That's what guided us to the 8 enforcement actions that we've already taken, and that's what's guiding our other enforcement actions around the country. So I want to make sure that the public understands we have not slowed down, and we're not going to slow down on enforcing the current drinking water standard that we have, the 70 parts per trillion. We continue to use that in enforcement actions around the country. There's a couple questions in the second to last row. Oh, okay, yes, sir. And then we'll go back there.
State Representative Tom Murda, I represent part of Montgomery County and part of Philadelphia. I want to make sure that you mentioned Horsham Township, but this contamination is not limited by zip code. I served in the military for 20 years. I was based at Willow Grove. I left Willow Grove to go to Iraq. And the contamination that has emanated from the use of those firefighting foams at Willow Grove is in many contiguous communities, including Upper Dublin Township, Warrington Township, Hatboro, Ambler Borough, probably Montgomery Township, and probably some other communities as well. And I just want to make sure that the agency realizes that any remediation efforts has to include these other communities. Thank you.
We do, and it's outlined in the plan. And I'm going to go a little bit further detail right now. We are using some state-of-the-art mapping technologies. We know where the chemicals were produced. We know where they were used in most instances, in large scale. And we're going to those communities. We're mapping them across the entire country, going to those communities, checking the groundwater where we know that the chemicals were used in large amounts to test the groundwater there to see whether or not the groundwater is safe. So we understand your concern that you just raised, and we are on top of that. Thank you. There's some questions in that second row.
Mark Cukor, resident Upper Dublin Township. 9 months ago, Administrator Pruitt said he was committed to having PFAS listed as a hazardous substance so that polluters could be held accountable for the costs of cleanup. Why has that process not been completed by now, and when will it be?
That is part of our plan, and we're moving forward with it. That was done at our engagement last May that we had at DC headquarters, where we had representatives from over 40 states and tribes and local governments present. We went forward with our 8 community engagements around the country, received over 120,000 comments. We've already started work on that process. That process is not a quick process, but we have already started working on the process of listing it as a hazardous substance under CERCLA, and we expect to finish that shortly. But again, while we were developing this plan, we did not stop and wait for the plan to come out today. We've been on top of all of these issues, including working on the hazardous substance listing for this. But none of these processes can be done overnight. They all, in order to make sure that they stand up in court, because there may be challenges, we have to follow the regulatory process, but we did not slow down in developing this plan. We were doing both at the same time. I believe there's a question next to you.
Hi, Joanne Stanton from the Bucksmont Coalition for Safer Water. Just as a community member, you know, we have several states across this country who have enacted MCLs that are quite low. And currently, we have many community members drinking water at levels certain states would deem unsafe. Do you feel, you know, if you had a child or you had a grandchild that was drinking water that was contaminated with PFAS that several states said was unsafe, would you feel that your action plan at a federal level is moving fast enough to protect the American people?
I think it is, because while we're moving forward in the action plan, as I said, we're still cleaning up. We're still taking enforcement actions. We're forcing people to clean up the drinking water where we see the numbers in high volumes like you're pointing to. In addition to the 8 direct enforcement actions that we took, we've assisted states in dozens of other enforcement actions around the country by providing them the technical assistance to make sure that their drinking water is cleened up. I can't prejudge the different standards that different states have set, but we're looking at those. They were the states that we invited to our listening session last May. We're going to take all of that into account as we set the federal number. The federal numbers, we have to make sure that we take into account the concerns of all the states across the entire country to make sure that we're setting the right number. But in the meantime, we are providing the technical assistance to all the states, including the states with different numbers, to make sure that their drinking water is cleaned up and is a safe level for children, regardless of what zip code they live in. Yes, sir, right here, the second, and then we'll go to the woman back there.
Hi, my name is Mark Favors. I'm from Colorado Springs, Colorado, and a lot of
welcome.
my family, thank you, I live in New York City right now. They are military veterans. They've been poisoned, and in the same town as from Peterson Air Force Base. But Fort Carson, which is also located in Colorado Springs, they banned PFAS in 1991 and declared it hazardous and had it replaced with non-hazardous. So I think we have 5,000 troops in Afghanistan right now. So what do you tell, and my 14-year-old cousin had to have a kidney transplant last year. So what do you tell the service members who are over in Afghanistan right now about why this process takes so long to protect their children and their families when the Army banned it and replaced the same substance in 1991 in the same town? How do we reconcile that as military
First of all, there's not just one substance here that we're talking about. We're talking about thousands of PFAS, PFOA chemicals. Right.
Fort Carson replaced it in 1991.
I knew they replaced it. I didn't know the year. But again, we are working with the Department of Defense. There are a number of defense facilities around the country where they're working to clean up the groundwater where they found it. That's part of our mapping exercise that we're doing. We're using their data as well as our own data and states and local government data as well. And we're trying to make sure that all the communities, that everybody, including our armed forces, have safe drinking water. And again, even though we started this process last May, we did not slow down over the last year. We have been enforcing the drinking water health advisory in communities around the country. We have other enforcement actions underway right now with other communities to make sure that their water gets cleaned up so that it is safe, and we're continuing to do that as we move forward with the MCL standard under the safe drinking water and the hazardous substances.
Investigating Peterson, you said you lacked the funds. That's been reported in the Denver Post in Colorado for over a year.
Well, Congress has appropriated more money to the Department of Defense to clean up the PFAS, PFOA in the last appropriations. We're working with them to make sure that the money is used wisely to get it cleaned up in the areas where the contamination is the greatest.
Are there any members of the media that have not asked a question yet? If you're a member of the media, please.
Hi, Justine McDaniel with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi.
For the monitoring piece, you said that you plan to include PFAS in the next UCMR testing. I'm
Yes.
wondering if you can talk more about that. Do you plan to test at lower levels than the previous round of UCMR? And do you believe that that testing could reveal that there are many more communities with contamination that aren't aware of it now?
I'm not sure what level we are going to test under the next round. You know, the first round was done a few years ago. We're doing the second round now to see if the problem is more widespread. We'll probably use different techniques and might very well be a different level. I'll leave that up to the career scientists at the agency at what level to test. And we can get back to you with more information on that. Are there any other members of the media that haven't asked a question yet? Yes, sir.
John Rollins with Channel 6 here in Philadelphia. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit to laypersons. You say that you still, the EPA is still enforcing at advisory levels at 70 parts per trillion.
Yes.
Though you haven't set a MCL, such as some states have, as low as, I guess, 10, 20, that sort of thing. What do you mean by enforcing? What are you doing? What are you forcing people to do? What are you enforcing?
We can, using our health advisory, we can force the cleanup of drinking water, contaminated drinking water. We don't have to have an MCL in order to force the cleanup. That is a misperception in the public. You don't have to have an MCL in order to force a cleanup. We've been using the 70 parts per trillion to force cleanups in communities around the country.
You're talking about remediation of groundwater.
Yes.
Not drinking water levels.
Well, groundwater, but we're looking at, and primarily for the sources of where people use the groundwater as a source for their drinking water.
But you cannot enforce that any sort of level on drinking waters on the output of a water company, in other words. They don't have any guidance here until you set an MCL.
No, the MCL will require regular monitoring by all the drinking water systems. If the drinking water system has a level higher than the 70 parts per trillion, then we can force the cleanup of the drinking water.
You can enforce
Yes.
the cleanup, but not with the output of the water company.
No, we can enforce it with the water company as well.
You can?
Yes,
At 70 parts? Is that
yes,
right?
yes. The media, any other questions from the media? Yes, sir.
Kyle with the Courier Times again. With the UCMR program, do you know which PFAS will PFOS and PFOA be on that again, or has that still yet to be determined? Which PFAS will be on the new UCMR program?
That will be determined by our career scientists at the agency. And they're going through the different substances to figure out which ones are the most important to test. Yes, in the back.
Hi, yeah, this is Susan Phillips with NPR.
Hi.
I was curious, a lot of the science is now heading towards a much lower MCL than 70 parts per trillion, as you know, including New Jersey, you know, the advisory council there. So can you give us a sense of where you see this going? Like, what is the science telling you right now? Do you feel confident that the current advisory level is actually keeping people safe? Or do you feel like you're going to move in this direction to have a much more strict advisory level?
We feel right now the 70 parts per trillion is a safe level for drinking water. As we go forward with the MCL, we'll be looking to see whether or not lower levels are required according to where the science directs us. But again, we are already working with states and communities around the country to clean up the water systems, and we're assisting states like New Jersey that has a tighter number, providing them technical assistance that they need in order to get the water systems cleaned up within their jurisdiction. So regardless of what the national number is, we can work with the states using their numbers today.
Okay, we have time for one more press question, please. Any press? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.